don't really have anything planned tonight. And you're probably saying, yeah, great. I'm a little disappointed. I did a major rant on COVID last night. I mentioned the word COVID like 24 times in just a matter of minutes. And I was just sure that Facebook was going to put warnings and labels all over my post. Not one. That kind of creeps me out a little bit. I'm like, what? Facebook doesn't like me anymore? But no worries, I'll get back to finding ways to make Facebook mad. In fact, my good friend Dave Hubbard is now spending 30 days in Facebook solitary. We don't know what he posted or what he did, but go Dave! In regard to my podcasts, we've talked about this before, but it's no secret that when you upload a video on Facebook, they've got an algorithm. And when it says it's processing, well, I would say during that time it's actually listening to your content, listening for keywords, so it knows what warnings to put up there, or worse yet, even to ban you. All right? We know it's there. So I'm thinking that my problem is, since my COVID rant last night didn't get their attention, that I obviously left out a whole lot of words that might get somebody's attention on Facebook. You know, just random words in the podcast like, terror, domestic, assassination, covert, NSA, CIA, president, secrets, documents, classified, supremacist, Nazi, KKK. And if none of those words catch Facebook's attention, I got a few more. Epstein didn't kill himself. Thinking back, I have always pushed the envelope when it comes to testing people's nerves. Facebook, you are not the first, okay? This goes way back to grade school. I'm sitting here tonight thinking there was one person who was better at pushing the envelope than me, and he was way better, and I had the utmost respect for him because of that. Unfortunately, we laid him to rest last week, and it was a very, very sad day. It was an old classmate and friend of mine, Jimmy Booth. Went to school with him all the way through, and I just remember so much about him because he was really a lot of fun. Never, ever a dull moment when he was around. It's like it gave you an excuse to go to school because you knew you'd be getting entertained by Jimmy Charles, as we called him. And I'm sitting here thinking about some things that came up. And I shared a few things at the funeral the other day when we were invited to come up and speak. But I'm going to share a lot more that I didn't share that day. Well, you'll find out why. And one thing that really comes to mind is something that happened in grade school. I'm not sure, 4th or so grade, somewhere in there. Jimmy was caught handing a note to somebody in the back of the class, and the teacher caught him. And in those days, they always wanted to make a big deal out of passing notes in class. Well, anyway, she says, Jimmy, what are you handing to that person? And he takes a piece of paper and he holds it up. And she says, well, what is it? And he says, well, it's a poem. It's a poem I wrote. And she folded her arms up and said, well, Jimmy, maybe you should just read that poem to the class. Well, what the teacher didn't know was that poem was actually kind of a joke about another student in the class, and probably not for public consumption, if you know what I mean. Well, anyway, Jimmy unfolds the note, and the teacher's still waiting. We're all waiting. And Jimmy proceeds to read the poem that he wrote. And it goes like this. Driving down the highway, Highway 94, Schmidt cut a fart and blew me out the door. Engine couldn't take it and blew all apart, all because of Schmidt's supersonic fart. And at this point, I'm just rolling on the floor, man. That's the funniest thing I ever heard in my life. Well, the teacher swiftly grabs Jimmy by the arm, takes him out in the hallway, and sends him to the principal's office. Well, she came back into the classroom, and I'm back in my chair now, but she hadn't forgot that I was the only one laughing. She gave me the little come here finger gesture, and I did. And she took me by the arm out into the hallway and sent me up to the office. And I remember sitting side by side in front of the office, waiting to see Mr. Filer. And as we sat there, I thought, wow, Jimmy may be like, suspended for the rest of his life from Miami R1. So I thought maybe I should probably tell him something in case I never saw him again. And that was, Jimmy, that was the most hilariously funny thing anyone ever could have written. And we high-fived and laughed and yeah. And it seems like we waited a long, long time sitting on that little bench there in front of the principal's office. And as time went on, we got a little more serious about our situation because we realized that this might get us both into a whole lot of trouble for whatever reason. Pretty soon, Mr. Filer did come and take us into the office, and he took us both in there, which I thought was kind of strange because in most criminal cases, you bring in one person, then you bring in the other person and that kind of thing. But no, Mr. Filer was pretty cool about it. So, and he was a very matter-of-fact person, very, very well-spoken. And I remember he folded his hands together across the desk and he said, well, and why are you boys here? And we both looked at each other because like, well, who goes first? It's kind of a chicken and egg thing here. As I recall, I spoke up and said, I was just laughing, Mr. Filer. What he did I thought was funny. I was just laughing. And Filer looks over at Jimmy Booth and he says, well, what'd you do? Jimmy says, well, I wrote a poem and it wasn't supposed to be for everybody. And then the teacher caught me and I had to read it to everybody. At this point, Mr. Filer was obviously quite intrigued, his head cocked to the side a little bit. Well, Jimmy, do you have the poem? He said, no, the teacher took it. He says, well, Jimmy, do you recall what it was? Jimmy says, well, I could try. Driving down the highway 94, Schmidt car far, blew me out the door, and she couldn't take it, blew all apart, all because Schmidt's supersonic fart. And Mr. Filer actually thought that was kind of funny. He stood us up, and then he walked around and gave us each a very light swat with his hand. Kind of one of those swats like Grandma does when you're leaving. It's like, okay. He opened the door and sent us packing. Of course, the story we told all the kids was we got 3 hard swats each with the Board of Education. That secret never left our lips. Until now. Cat's out of the bag. High school was a lot of fun with Jimmy, especially Halloween. It's like, if you wanted to go have fun on Halloween, you went with Jimmy Charles. Remember one night we were in Amoret, and the cops would always be patrolling on Halloween night, the toilet paper throwers and the watermelon throwers and all that, what I'm saying. Cops were always cruising on Halloween. And one night when I was in Amoret with Jimmy Charles on Halloween, I remember we'd stand up by the highway, and when we saw the cop coming, we'd run into the alley as fast as we could, trying to look suspicious. And we did that like 49 times, and not once did the cops even begin to care. And we're like, why? What are we doing wrong? I mean, we were really both pretty puzzled. Thinking about all the times that we got in trouble when we didn't want to get in trouble or get caught, and now we're actually trying to get caught, and they won't pay any attention to us. It was kind of a head-scratcher, if you know what I mean. I do know that neither one of us ever gave a whole lot of thought about, the repercussions or the danger that we might put ourselves in, And there was always this weird multiplication of complications when we got together, doubling up on the unintended consequences of being teenage boys, that kind of thing. And I'll give you a really good example. Jimmy says, hey, I know somebody not too far from here that's growing pot back in the woods behind their house. And Jimmy and I and the Neater boys and some other people got together thinking, you know what, we're going to go take care of that pot patch. And we did just that. We got Roger Stanfield's truck and we drove way around these trees and the back way and snuck up behind this tree line where this big pot patch was at. We had to be careful not be seen. Anyway, we chopped all the pot off and we put it in the back of Roger's truck. And it was a big heaping pile. It was like 2 feet above the bed of the truck full. like loose hay. And there was, 5 or 6 of us, and we had one driver, and the rest of them, we all laid on the pot because we didn't want to blow out. Because we took that pot a couple miles over to where they were building a bridge. And where they had poured concrete, they had straw everywhere. And we thought, you know what? We're going to take that pot, we're going to mix it in with that straw, and we're going to burn it. Going to destroy that stuff. And we were pretty proud of ourselves after all that. You know what? We did our civic duty. The only thing is, we didn't think that, hey, you know what? If we had met I don't know, state patrolman, something like that, while transporting a heaping truck bed load of pot, I think we'd all be in a whole lot of trouble. Yet another cat out of the bag tidbit that's never been revealed to the public. And there's more. I went over to Jimmy's house one afternoon. We were going to hang out or do something. I don't remember what it was. And as soon as I got there, he says, "Come on, we got to go up the road." I'm like, "What?" "Come on, just go with me." And we went about a half mile up the road to where the Nelsons lived. And as we arrived at their house, I look up in the trees and I see about 5 bicycles hanging in the trees way up there, like 30 feet. Whole bunch of them. I'm like, wow, how'd they get up there? And then I looked over at Jimmy and I realized, now I know how they got up there. And I just got roped into helping him get them down, even though I didn't help put them up there. And I remember Fern Nelson standing with hands on hips, waiting for us to get those bikes down out of that tree because she wasn't real happy. The only catch is, when he put them up there, he used some rope to pull them up, and then he tied him off up there and then cut the rope off. Well, I remember he said he threw the rope that he cut off, hanging all 5 of those bikes or whatever, about behind the barn. So we went out and got the rope. We tied all the rope together so we'd have one long piece, because we needed a long piece, right? And from that point, we climbed up in the trees and tied our new rope onto the rope up there, and we would gently lower the bikes down. And I swear that took about 2 hours. This was actually a double bad for me, because Fern was convinced that I helped him put him up there. It's like, no, Fern, I was just helping him take him down. And, to this day, I'm sure she's still convinced that I helped Jimmy Charles put them bikes up in them trees. Well, the double bad part of it is, in a previous podcast, you may have heard me talking about a cake that I made with my friends out of a cow chip, and we frosted it and put it in a school carnival. And Fern Nelson, who was the school board president at the time, bought the cake in an auction and cut it to serve to the other people on the school board, and it had a bad ending for me. Okay, that's all I need to say. The fun with Jimmy Charles didn't end after school. Turns out we both ended up getting married young, and we both ended up living a few doors down from each other on Wicks Lane in Butler. I had a telescope. And Jimmy Charles come down one night and said, "Can I borrow your telescope?" I said, "Sure." And I didn't get my telescope back for like a week. I'm like, "Hey, Jimmy, can I get my scope back?" "Oh, yeah, I'll get that to you." One day I come home and it's leaning up against there by the front door, and okay. Well, I go to looking at it, and the eyepiece is full of dirt. I mean, the lens was pushed way back up in there. I mean, it was just a plug of dirt in the eyepiece of my telescope. I'm like, what? So I quizzed Jimmy Charles about it, and he says, "Well, these houses they're building over here, there's people living in there, and they ain't got no curtains yet, and I just kind of want to see what they were doing. And I was up on the roof the other night, and the telescope slid off and hit the ground, man. I'm sorry." I believe that he was genuinely upset that he broke my telescope, and he just really didn't want to have to tell me about it. And I remember for a long time, he tried to make it up to me. He really did. I'm like, "Man, it was a $20 telescope. Don't worry about it." "Oh, man, I feel bad about that." I distinctly remember one night, living on Wicks Lane, Jimmy Booth and this other guy come walking in carrying this heavy stew pot thing, like a broaster thing. And it looked to be very heavy. They were both straining to hold it up. It had a lid on it. I'm like, "What the hell?" And he says, "I got this for you." I said, "Really? You got me a stew pot?" And he goes, "No, check it out. It's full of pennies." And I pulled the lid off, and sure enough, it was full of pennies. There was probably $50 or $60 worth of pennies in this big stew pot. And I don't know where Jimmy got a stew pot full of pennies, but he gave it to me because he felt so bad about breaking my telescope. I'm going to wrap it up. You know, life is short. It really is. I may have told this story before, but there's a cemetery down by Hume that I stop at once in a while when I'm out riding motorcycles. I'll just pull in there and cool off. And there is one tombstone in particular that's got my attention. It's really big, but it's very, very plain. And looking at that tombstone, all I know about that guy is his name, the day he was born, and the day he died. There's nothing else on the tombstone. And I'm thinking, that guy had a life. That guy, maybe he had a sense of humor. Maybe he invented something. God only knows. He had a life. And we don't know a thing about him. And I'm just saying this. Memories. Make those memories. Remember those memories. Share those memories. Until next time, be safe.